This video is going to help us review the concept of completing the square with quadratics. This is something we did way back in the beginning of the year, but with conic sections, this new unit, it is a very important concept that you'll be using in a lot of problems. So it's something we like to take a day to just review and get our mind set on it. So completing the square, the main idea behind it is you are trying to create a perfect square binomial. You're trying to make something so it looks like x minus 1 or x plus 5 squared, that quantity squared. So really what you're trying to do to square something means to multiply it by itself, is you're trying to break a quadratic into two of the same factors on it. That's really what you're trying to do, is you're trying to factor it so that they are the exact same parentheses. But if we look at the first example, x squared plus 8x minus 15, it doesn't work out to be factored into two of the same parentheses. So we have to create it. That is our job. So what we're going to do when we have a quadratic that we're trying to complete the square with, we're going to keep the first two terms. We're going to keep the quadratic term, the x squared, and we're going to keep the linear term, the 8x. But we're going to move the constant over to the other side by doing the opposite operation. So I'm going to add 15. And notice I left two placeholders here. I left one here, and I left one here. And what we're going to do is we are going to create a new constant that allows us to factor it into two of the same factors. Now, the way we do that is, notice we want these to be the exact same number. We want them to be the exact same, either both minus 5, plus 3, plus 3. They need to be the same number. So if you ever want to split a number so that you get two of the same, you really take that number. So I'm going to take that 8x, and I'm going to divide it by 2. That's going to give me 4. Now, if I think about that, if I split something in half, I'm creating two of the same numbers by splitting them in half. So that's going to be a very helpful number for us on it. We're going to take that 4 and we're going to square it. And that would give us a positive 16. But if I put a positive 16 on the left side of the equation, I have to put a positive 16 on the right side of the equation. Now we can factor it, because what number multiplies to 16 and adds to 8? That would be 4 and 4. So that number, when we divide it by 2, we got x, we have plus 4 squared, and it equals 31. That's completing the square, is we take the linear term and we divide it by 2, because that creates the two factors that we're looking for on it. And the number we get is what goes in the parentheses, that positive 4. However, we can't just make up a positive 4, because when we factor this, we would get a plus 16 here, which means we have to do that to both sides. So the main idea is to keep the quadratic and linear term. Those are helpful. Move the constant to the other side by doing the opposite operation on it. So we move that minus 11, it's a positive 11 over here. We are going to have two placeholders, because if I change the equation on the left side, I have to change the equation on the right side. We take the linear term, that's 16x, and I'm going to divide it by 2. That's going to give me 8. Take that number and square it. So to create a perfect square trinomial, that has to be a 64 there. But if I put a 64 on the left side, I have to put a 64 on the right side. What number goes in the parentheses with the x? X something quantity squared. Well, it's that positive 8 that we got when we divided by 2. And that is going to equal 11 plus 64, 75. That's completing the square. So if I look at number 3, notice the quadratic and linear term are already there by themselves. The constant is already on the right-hand side by itself. I just need to put my placeholder here and my placeholder here for it. Take the quadratic term, divide by 2, and I'm going to get 1. I square that, and that's what goes up here, and that's a positive 1. But if I add 1 on the left side, I have to add 1 on the right side. By doing that, what goes in the parentheses that is squared? Well, it's the number we got when we divided by 2. It's that positive 1. And then negative 4 plus 1 is negative 3. And now we completed the square. So these are first 3, I say, are pretty basic ones. It has a quadratic term and it has a linear term. And this is what the form structure you need. It has to say x squared. And that's why if you look at number 4 says 4x squared. And that's not good. We can't have that. In order to complete the square, it needs to say x squared. What I'm going to do is I am going to factor out that 4. And that's going to give me an x squared, a minus 6x. So there's my quadratic term. There's my linear term. I'm going to, in the same step, insert my placeholder here. And it equals 3. And I'm going to insert the placeholder on the right-hand side as well. So when you have a quadratic where your quadratic term is not 1, it's 2x squared, it's 3x squared, it's 4x squared, it's 9x squared. This has to be 1. So what you want to do is you want to factor out that every time. Move the constant to the other side, factor it out. Because now if you look in the parentheses is good. The parentheses, if I kind of even just don't even look at that 4 on the outside, if I just go like this, now it looks exactly like one of those previous problems. Which means I could take this negative 6, take that negative 6, and I can divide by 2. Now that's going to give me a negative 3. I want to square that. When you square a negative, you still get a positive. Now you're tempted, everyone is, to put a plus 9 on that right-hand side, which is wrong. Because you're not really adding 9 on the left-hand side. You have to remember what you're dealing with here is you are looking at not just one of those parentheses, you are looking at 4 of those parentheses. That 4 is actually going to get multiplied by that 9. So I'm really adding 36 on that right-hand side. So when you factor out that leading coefficient, it's going to play a role back in balancing the equation for it. So I have a 4 parentheses x, I'm going to have the minus 3 squared equals, and that'd be a 39 here. So if I want to solve for just the parentheses, I would divide both sides by 4. This is the more complicated completed squares that you're going to have, is when you have a leading coefficient. And what you do is you factor it out. But keep in mind, it's going to play a role again when you are balancing the equation. You complete the square in the parentheses the same way you would the normal problems. So this is kind of review of completing the square. Now we're going to apply it to writing the equations of circles. Now we can keep in mind that the equation of a circle on the formula sheet says x minus h squared plus y minus k squared equals my radius squared, where your center is the coordinate hk and your radius is the value of r. So you have to square root the r squared. And this also involves the idea of completing the square for these. So if I look at number 5, what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at what I have in common. This x squared can go with this 8x. And so I'm going to write that down. I have an x squared. I have a plus 8x. And just like we've done before, I'm going to insert a placeholder. I'm then going to kind of look at the same thing. I have a y squared, a minus 2y. So those two are going to go together. So I'll put that right here. I have a positive y squared minus 2y, and I'm going to insert my placeholder there. Now the constant goes to the other side, just like we've done in the past. So I'm going to have it equals 8. But remember, I have two placeholders on the left-hand side. I have one for the x squared and x, and I have one for the y squared and y. So I'm going to put them over here as well. So this is the general structure we have when we are completing the square for this. Give myself some more room. So rather than completing the square once, we're going to do it twice. So I'm going to take this 8x and I'm going to divide by 2, and that's going to give me a 4. I'm going to square that, and that's going to give me a positive 16. So this first one is going to be an x plus 4, the quantity squared. And I added 16 to the left-hand side, so I have to add 16 to the right-hand side. I'm going to take this minus 2y, I'm going to take that negative 2, and I'm going to divide by 2, and that's going to give me a negative 1. I'm going to square that, that's going to give me a positive 1. But I added 1 to the right-hand side, which means I better add 1, to the left-hand side, I add 1 to the right-hand side. So that's going to give me, I have a plus, and it's going to be a y minus 1 squared. 8 plus 16 plus 1 is 25. That is the structure for the equation of a circle. It is x minus h squared. It is a y minus k squared, and it equals my radius squared. I have that structure now. I just complete the square for the x term, for the y term, to make sure I balance the right-hand side. So my center is going to be negative 4, 1. If r squared equals 25, I'm going to take the square root of 25, which is 5, and now I have the equation of the circle, and I have the center, and I have the radius for it. So if I look at number 6, same idea. I am going to take my like terms. So I have an x squared, and I have negative 4x. And I'm going to piece them together. X squared minus 4x. I'm going to complete the square with that part, so I'm going to insert my placeholder here. I have a y squared, I have a positive 12y, so I'm going to put those two together. So I have a positive y squared plus 12y. I'm going to complete the square with those two, so I'm going to insert my placeholder there. It's going to equal, if I move that 30 to the other side by subtraction, it's going to equal negative 30. I put two placeholders on the left-hand side, so I have to put those two placeholders on the right-hand side to keep the equation balanced. And now I just complete the square. I'm going to take that negative 4. I'm going to divide by 2. That's going to give me a negative 2. Square that. That's going to give me a positive 4. But if I add 4 on the left side, I better add 4 on the right side. It will give me an x minus 2 squared. I'm going to take that positive 12. I'm going to divide by 2. That's going to give me a 6. I'm going to square that. That gives me a positive 36 there. But if I add 36 on the left-hand side, I better add 36 on the right-hand side. As a parentheses squared, that's going to be a y plus 6. Negative 30 plus 4 plus 36 is going to give me 10. Again, now you have the equation of a circle. You have an x minus h squared, plus you have a y minus k squared, and you have a radius squared value. So my center is the coordinate 2, -6. R squared equals 10, so my radius is the square root of 10. There it is for completing the square with circles. You're really doing it once with the x term and once with the y term on it. If you have any questions, please reach out and ask.